Hey everybody, it's 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. We are in the seventh Sunday in Ordinary Time. We are in Matthew chapter 5 verse 38 to 48 in continuation of last week's gospel text. And this week, remember, we also slip into the season of Lent on Wednesday. So this is the last Sunday in Ordinary Time before we enter into the season of Lent on Wednesday. I've entitled today's teaching, Hit List or Prayer List. Jesus, in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, after having given his disciples identity and taught them a very radical way of living as seen in the Beatitudes, now teaches his disciples to be faithful to the commandments and not to the traditional interpretations as taught by the scribes and Pharisees. Last week, we began the six hypotheses. Now, what makes these six hypotheses so radical is that Jesus teaches his disciples to go beyond the text of the law to the spirit from which it evolved. If you don't remember what the hypothesis is, it begins with the words, "You have heard it said to you, but I say to you." So, like hypermarket, market and hypermarket, thesis and hypothesis go beyond what was taught to you. Now, the disciples had to live like citizens of heaven among the citizens on earth, marked with the behavior of being, as we heard 2 Sundays ago, being the salt of the earth and to be the light of the world. This morning's gospel deals with the last two teachings in Matthew chapter 5. Teachings that are set apart by the words of Jesus when he says, "You have heard it said." Now, at the very heart of these teachings and the very heart of these hypotheses is love. But a love that could be lost in hatred and a love that could be lost in unforgiveness. You know, studying the first of these hypotheses, verses 38 to 44, one realizes that these words of the Old Testament have often been misinterpreted, misunderstood as a very vengeful command. You know, Mahatma Gandhi, the father of our nation, misunderstood in that sense an eye for an eye when he added the words, "will make the whole world blind." You know, at the very heart of this commandment was not a law that created a measure of revenge, but a law that created a measure to prevent disproportionate revenge. That's why if you take my eye, if I take your eye, you can only take my eye. To prevent disproportionate revenge, not that you took my eye, I take off your head. Mahatma Gandhi misunderstood this, an eye for an eye, and he said, "will make the whole world blind." But he had a point in what he said. The ancient Israelites set limits to justice. So, as I said, for the ancient Israelite, if I knocked one of your tooth out, you could only knock one out of mine. You could not knock 10 in return. Now, having said this, the law never demanded proportionate revenge. You were most free to also forgive. It was simply, as I said, a law to set limits on having your pound of flesh. So, this teaching called the lex talionis regulated revenge and retaliation very clearly. Now, remember that its original intention was humanitarian. However, by the time of Jesus, the rabbis felt that this was too harsh and they began commuting the penalties to fines. Now, this lex talionis was expounded by Jesus in 4 case studies, in verse 39, in verse 40, in verse 41, and in verse 42. The case studies might appear to make the disciple look like a doormat, but that's not really true. See, Jesus teaches non-resistance to evil in the sense of avoiding physical violence or damage. Like Gandhiji, one is called to use psychological or moral resistance which throws the enemy off guard. So the strategy is designed for winning and not really for passive resignation or indifference to evil. That's not the point. So the goal, therefore, is to shame the opponent into a change of heart. So if one, therefore, is slapped on the right cheek as a form of an insult, or unjustly condemned in a court of law, or forced by the Roman authorities to be the carrier of goods for a mile as part of the imperial messenger service, or show kindness, forbearance, and generosity to others, the disciple is urged to turn this situation into a positive witness of love. In the face of evil, respond with love and shame your oppressor. That's the whole point that Jesus was making. So it was not meant to be treated like a doormat. Somebody slaps you on one cheek, here you go, I'm the doormat. No. Yeah, you shame the other person so that he understands his tremendous mistake. Now, Jesus must have felt compelled to place these relevant and topical case studies before his listeners because they lived these situations in their daily life. But even more, Jesus had to correct what was wrongly interpreted. Let me give an example. The law of Leviticus was clear. If you look at Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, and this is a key line, you'll find it again coming in the season of Lent. I think on Saturday of the first week of Lent or Monday of the first week of Lent, you'll hear this line again. In Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, it said, love your neighbor as yourself. But in their interpretation of the law, the Sadducees had dropped the words as yourself and they added, and hate your enemies. This very narrow view would confine love to a very narrow ethnocentric framework. And sadly, this is exactly what is going on in the world today. Love only your kind. Love only those of your faith. Give charity only to your kind, only to those of your faith. It's very narrow, very ethnocentric, yeah, based on your ethnicity, on your religion, etc. Now, the Jew would have, in that sense, because of this law that the Sadducees had changed very conveniently, the Jew would have no need to love anyone, therefore, except another Jew. Their despise, therefore, for the other nations becomes understandable, and see this also in the light, as I keep saying, of the refugee situation of today, driving people out because of their ethnicity or their religion. But Jesus will also in the Gospel of today give 4 arguments against such behavior. In verses 45 to 48, he will argue that the persecutor needs to be disarmed by love. Christianity is not introverted aggression, but aggression transmitted into a strategy for winning through the wisdom of love. So Jesus wants love to be the answer in the face of hate. And so he confronts his listeners when he suggests that if you love those who love you, your reward is an increase in their love. But if you love those who hate you, your reward is an increase in God's love. So also, what merit is it when you bestow a blessing on your own kin? The disciple is called to be perfect. That's what we heard today. A word used in the Gospels only here and in chapter 19, verse 21. And it means that the disciple should be conformed to a divine ideal. In short, my dear friends, Jesus confronts his listeners today. It is not enough to have the scriptures in our head without love in our heart. We can quote the scriptures, read it, learn it, but it makes little sense if we don't live it and live the spirit of it. For Jesus, the attitude was far more important than aptitude. Attitude was far more important than aptitude. for the attitude is the rudder that controls everything in our life. Thank you for joining me. Do remember that from this Wednesday onwards, I begin a new series that I will do during the season of Lent. It's mostly based on a reflection from the first reading, and in this week to come you will hear from Leviticus, from Isaiah, from the book of Deuteronomy. So readings that you may not be very familiar with, but some very beautiful thoughts that God invites us to. I also want to suggest that you begin to plan your Lenten discipline already now. Don't wait for the last day. Plan your Lenten discipline. How would you like to approach this season of Lent this year? What is it that you are going to observe this year? And don't do it based on what somebody else does. Do it based in your heart. On Ash Wednesday, I will give you a special teaching that talks about pushing yourself this season of Lent to the maximum, not to the minimum. Yeah, and you'll see the graces flow when you push yourself to the maximum in the season of Lent. Also, as a run up to Lent, these last few days I have put out on my blog, put out also to those of you who asked me to send you the text version of the teachings. I have sent about 10 articles that I've previously written that will help you to navigate your way through these days as we prepare ourselves for Lent. If you go to my blog, pottypadre.com, go to the search section and type either the words Lent or Ash Wednesday, you'll get a whole series of Lenten reflections, pre-Lenten reflections that I wrote, including one on Shrove Tuesday. So why do we call it Pancake or Shrove Tuesday, the day before Ash Wednesday? I've written an article on why we put ashes on our heads. I wrote an article on 10 ways in which you can approach Lent. I think I called it that. 10 ways you can approach Lent without standing on your head or something to that effect. Yeah. So lots of articles for you to read, prepare yourself, and get ready for this joyful season of Lent when God renews our hearts and minds. I'm already wearing the color purple. The color purple is behind me. So I'll see you again tomorrow at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock is with me, Father Warner. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Bye for now.